Far away, in the southern reaches of what is now New Mexico, a quiet basin stretches beneath an open sky. The land is dry today, coated in fine gypsum sand that shines white in the sun. Yet long ago, this was a place of water, a shallow lake spread across the basin, rimmed with reeds and grass, alive with birds, insects, and grazing animals. The winds carried the scents of freshwater marshes, in the mud along the lake's edge, soft enough to yield under each step. A series of footprints was left. They belonged not to animals, though many creatures passed here, but to people. Human beings walked across this place more than 23,000 years ago, long before most had imagined the Americas were inhabited. The footprints stretch in winding paths, some crisp, some blurred by later movement. They are pressed into layers of mud, now hardened into compact sediment, later revealed as wind stripped the ground. Radiocarbon dating of seeds trapped within the layers has fixed their age, showing that during the height of the last ice age, humans were already established in this desert basin. The discovery astonishes researchers because it pushes back the confirmed human presence in North America thousands of years earlier than once thought. Step by step, the scene can be imagined with care. A group crosses the soft margins of the ancient lake. Some tracks are broad and adult-sized, others are smaller, belonging to children. In a few stretches, the prints reveal someone carrying weight, their steps sinking deeper, their balance shifting elsewhere. A child runs, their pace uneven, sometimes skipping. No tools, no bones, no hearths remain nearby, only footprints. Yet those impressions carry an intimacy unmatched by stone or bone. They mark direct moments of passage, of ordinary life, set down in a landscape now transformed. The lake itself, known today as Lake Otero, dried thousands of years ago. At its peak, it covered much of the Tularosa Basin. As climate shifted, the waters receded, leaving dunes of brilliant gypsum. The footprints survived, buried beneath layers of sediment, hidden until erosion and research revealed them again. In their preservation, scientists find a rare alignment of chance. Normally, footprints vanish in hours, washed away or eroded by wind. Here, fine layers of silt and clay sealed them, one season after another, capturing fleeting human presence across centuries. Beneath the stillness of the desert today, these traces remind us that human journeys were underway at a time when much of the continent was locked in ice. Vast glaciers covered Canada and the northern plains. Mountains were sheathed in snow and frozen rivers. Sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than they are now, exposing coastlines that have long since vanished beneath the waves. Yet here, in the heart of the continent, people lived and moved, finding water, food, and shelter. And archaeologists working at White Sands tread carefully across these fragile surfaces. Each footprint is documented, photographed, and scanned. Many are so faint that they emerge only when moisture rises in the sand at dawn. Scientists have found more than simple lines of travel. They have mapped pauses, gatherings, and returns along the lakeshore. Some tracks overlap with those of extinct animals, including giant sloths and mammoths, suggesting moments when humans and megafauna crossed paths in the same landscape. The footprints, therefore, are not isolated curiosities, but windows into entire ecosystems now lost. One remarkable detail is the discovery of seeds within the footprint layers. These belong to a species of aquatic plant, once abundant in the lake margins. Because these seeds can be radiocarbon dated with precision, They anchor the human presence to a secure time frame between 21 and 23,000 years ago. This method strengthens the claim against doubts that earlier artifacts sometimes raise. Tools and bones can be displaced in sediments, but footprints fixed within dated layers are harder to challenge. Still, scientific debate continues. Some scholars question whether radiocarbon signals might be altered by old carbon in groundwater. Others argue that even if the age is correct, the footprints may represent temporary presence, not a sustained settlement. Such debates remind us how fragile interpretation can be when evidence is sparse. The unresolved mystery lingers. How did people reach this basin so early, when massive ice sheets blocked the northern routes? Did they travel along a western coastline now submerged, moving south by sea and shore? Or did they arrive in pulses, through interior corridors that opened and closed with shifting glaciers? The footprints do not tell us. They only show that, somehow, people were already here, in a time of climatic extremes. Beyond human stories, the footprints carry a planetary lesson. They reveal a world in flux, where ice reshaped oceans and climate dictated survival. The last glacial maximum, the coldest span of the Ice Age, was pressing upon the globe. Forests contracted, deserts expanded, coastlines shifted outward across the continents. For those who walked along Lake Otero, the planet's changes were not distant abstractions but daily realities. Waterlines rose and fell. Game animals moved with grasslands. Winds carried dust storms across plains. Scale deepens the picture. The migration into the Americas was not a short trek, but journeys across thousands of kilometers, from Siberia into Alaska, then southward across valleys and mountains. The distance rivals the breadth from Paris to Seoul, or further still. Each step carried families into landscapes no human had seen before. To find footprints at the heart of New Mexico is to recognize how far these journeys had already extended, and how enduring human adaptability had proven to be. Quietly, the White Sands site adds dimension to prehistory. No grand monuments stand here, no tools of polished stone or carvings of bone. Instead, the record is humbler, the soft pressure of feet upon wet ground. Yet it is precisely this humility that captures imagination. For in those shallow impressions lies evidence that long before glaciers retreated, long before mammoths vanished, long before farming reshaped landscapes, people had already walked, gathered, and lived here. The gypsum dunes shift in silence now, their pale ridges rolling toward distant mountains. Visitors who walk here today see only sand and sky. Yet beneath the surface lie layers of time, holding the memory of lives that once passed. The oldest known footprints in the Americas whisper that the story of human presence here reaches deeper into the Ice Age than once believed. And they remind us that even the simplest traces can survive across millennia, waiting to be uncovered in their quietness. Step by step, the journey begins here. Before the end of the Ice Age, the world looks very different. Vast sheets of ice cover much of North America. The Laurentide ice sheet stretches across what is now Canada, extending southward into the northern plains of the United States. To the west, the Cordilleran ice sheet presses against mountain ranges, burying valleys beneath kilometers of frozen mass. These enormous glaciers lock away water, lowering the seas across the globe. Coastlines stretch outward, exposing wide continental shelves that are hidden today beneath the waves. It is within this frozen landscape that the White Sands footprints take on their deeper meaning. When those steps were pressed into the mud of Lake Otero, The ice had not yet released its grip. The last glacial maximum, as scientists call it, was near its peak. Temperatures were colder, storms fiercer, and the natural world was arranged in unfamiliar patterns. Yet people were already present, moving across this land. The presence of humans at this time suggests remarkable resilience. To survive here required adapting to environments at once rich and harsh. Glacial melt created rivers and wetlands along ice margins, while tundra grasslands stretched across exposed plains. Herds of mammoth and bison followed the vegetation. Along lake shores and rivers, waterfowl gathered. For human groups, these resources offered possibilities, though the climate imposed sharp limits. Winters were severe, summers brief, and weather often unstable. Archaeologists trace evidence of these conditions not only in New Mexico but across the continent. Pollen cores taken from ancient sediments show the spread of steppe-like vegetation, adapted to cold, dry conditions. Charcoal layers suggest fire use persisted even in such climates, as humans cleared patches or maintained warmth. Bones of extinct megafauna bear cut marks, silent testimony to hunting or scavenging. The White Sands site fits into this broader pattern, placing living people squarely in the midst of Ice Age ecosystems. One lesser-known detail emerges from analysis of the footprints themselves. Researchers have found layers that suggest repeated visits across seasons. Some tracks lie above others, separated by thin bands of sediment. This means that the lakeshore was not crossed once, but many times over years or even centuries. It was not a fleeting moment, but part of a pattern of return, perhaps tied to seasonal migrations of animals or cycles of water levels in the lake. Such repetition implies familiarity, a recognition of place that deepens our sense of how these groups lived. Yet many mysteries remain. The precise routes taken by these early people are still unclear. The ice sheets to the north formed a formidable barrier. At their maximum extent, they blocked interior paths entirely. If humans were in New Mexico during this period, they must have reached the continent earlier, perhaps during a window before glaciers expanded fully, or by traveling along coasts where kelp forests and marine life supported migration. Archaeologists continue to investigate these scenarios, but no single answer has yet resolved the question. Planetary forces frame the scene. The Ice Age was not static, but dynamic, its boundaries advancing and retreating with shifts in climate. As glaciers expanded, they scraped the land, carving valleys, rerouting rivers, and pushing soil into moraines. As they melted, they released torrents of water, forming vast proglacial lakes. These lakes sometimes drained suddenly, reshaping entire landscapes downstream. For human groups living far to the south, these distant changes still mattered. They influenced rainfall patterns, animal movements, and the spread of vegetation. The footprints at White Sands stand as local evidence within this immense global system. Step by step, one can picture families walking along the lake as cool winds blew from the north. Behind them stretched thousands of kilometers of unfamiliar terrain, much of it icy and forbidding. Ahead lay still more uncharted landscapes. The journey into the Americas was not a simple passage, but a process spanning generations. Each season, decisions were made: when to move, where to camp, which resources to follow. The White Sands tracks record one such season, fixed in place by layers of time. Scientists studying these prints often reflect on their fragile survival. Footprints are among the rarest forms of evidence. Tools may endure for tens of thousands of years, bones for longer still, but impressions in mud usually vanish in moments. For so many to be preserved here suggests not only unusual conditions but also repeated human presence. Some prints show toes splayed, others carry the marks of slipping on wet ground. Each detail reminds us that these were living bodies, subject to the same physics of movement we know today. One mystery concerns whether the people of White Sands witnessed the full majesty of Ice Age megafauna. At nearby sites, footprints of giant ground sloths cross human tracks, with evidence suggesting the animals turned or reared in response. Mammoth prints, too, appear in the sediments. This overlap hints at encounters between species. Brief moments when humans and giant creatures shared the same shoreline. The humans who left the tracks may have hunted smaller game, gathered plants, or collected freshwater resources, while watching immense animals pass nearby. Whether they feared them, pursued them, or simply coexisted remains uncertain. Beyond questions of survival lies the broader recognition that humanity was not waiting for the Ice Age to end before settling the Americas. For a long time, the dominant view held that people arrived only after glaciers receded, opening inland routes around 13,000 years ago. The White Sands discovery challenges this, showing presence nearly 10,000 years earlier. This forces a reconsideration of migration, settlement, and adaptation. Humans were not simply following the retreat of ice, they were navigating and enduring within its grip. On a planetary scale, with a last glacial maximum shaped not only the Americas but the entire globe, deserts expanded in Africa and Asia, monsoon systems weakened, leaving regions parched, forests contracted into refuges, oceans cooled, currents shifted, and species distributions changed. Humanity, dispersed across continents by this time, encountered varied challenges: cold steppes in Eurasia, shrinking rainforests in the tropics, and icy frontiers in the Americas. The White Sands footprints are one thread in this vast tapestry, but they speak directly, placing human steps into the heart of these global transformations. The ice has long since vanished from New Mexico. Only distant mountain peaks carry seasonal snow. Yet in the gypsum dunes, the silence holds the memory of glacial times. To walk here now is to move across a surface once shaped by waters fed from distant ice sheets. Beneath lies the record of those who came before, steady steps pressed into mud at the very height of Earth's frozen age. Far away, the glaciers retreat. But in this section of story, they still dominate the horizon, and humanity is already moving beneath their shadow. Along the edges of the vanished lake, human steps once followed the rhythm of water. In the basin of southern New Mexico, Lake Otero spread wide during the late Pleistocene, fed by streams from surrounding mountains. Its shallow waters shifted with seasons, sometimes flooding, sometimes shrinking to muddy flats. Where water met land, rich zones of life formed. These shores offered reeds, fish, birds, and grazing grounds for animals, creating corridors that drew people again and again. When the footprints were made, the lake stood lower than at its peak but still stretched across kilometers. Its margins left firm mud flat, ideal for walking and leaving impressions. Here, people likely paused, gathering plants, collecting seeds, or observing animals that came to drink. The abundance of resources along ancient lake shores mirrors patterns seen worldwide. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans often moved along watercourses, following rivers, lakes, and coastlines. Water provided not only sustenance but also guidance. natural paths through landscapes. One of the lesser-known details from White Sands is the presence of footprints interwoven with those of birds, mammoths, and canids. The mingling of human and animal tracks shows how many species converged at the lake. Some bird prints belong to large, extinct species, reminders of ecosystems no longer present. Others show smaller creatures that scurried across the mud in search of food. This convergence highlights the richness of the environment, where human life was part of a larger web of interactions. The global context adds depth to this scene. During the last glacial maximum, many lakes in the southwestern United States were larger than today. Scientists call them pluvial lakes, formed when cooler, wetter conditions increased rainfall or reduced evaporation. Some of these lakes were immense, stretching across valleys in Nevada, Utah, and California. Lake Bonneville, ancestor of today's Great Salt Lake, covered an area larger than modern Lake Michigan. Compared to these giants, Lake Otero was modest, but for people traveling through arid lands, even small lakes offered critical refuge. The presence of water defined routes of survival. Still, mysteries remain. Did the groups who left their footprints live permanently near the lake, or were they passing through as part of longer journeys? Archaeologists have not yet found stone tools or camp remains closely tied to the White Sands prints. It may be that people camped on higher ground, away from flooding, and their traces are hidden or eroded. Or it may be that this basin was part of seasonal movement, visited for resources before groups continued elsewhere. The footprints speak clearly of presence but remain silent about permanence. Step by step, one can imagine the daily rhythm. Morning light glimmers over the water. People walk along the shore, leaving fresh impressions in wet mud. A mammoth herd grazes at a distance, its tracks pressed deep into the earth. Birds gather in flock, lifting into the air at sudden disturbance. Children play, running lightly, their prints scattered in arc. An adult carries a heavy load, perhaps a bundle of gathered plants or the weight of a small child, their footsteps sinking more deeply. The scene is ordinary, yet in its ordinariness lies its power. It is a glimpse of daily life preserved in sediment. Another detail lies in the orientation of the prints. Some sets move in parallel, suggesting group travel. Others cross at angles, perhaps marking individuals moving independently. The directions reveal a choreography of movement, structured yet unplanned, much as in any gathering of people today. For archaeologists, such patterns allow glimpses of social behavior rarely visible in ancient records. It is one thing to find a stone tool, it is another to trace the steps of children running beside adults. On a planetary scale, lakes like Otero were not permanent. They filled during cooler, wetter times and shrank when climate shifted toward warmth and dryness. As Earth moved through glacial cycles, rainfall patterns altered dramatically. Monsoons weakened or strengthened. Winds shifted. For those who lived in these regions, such changes dictated survival strategies. When lakes dried, people moved. When waters rose, they gathered. The footprints at White Sands are thus a frozen moment within a much longer rhythm of environmental change. One mystery concerns the precise timing of lake shrinkage. Geological studies show that Lake Otero began retreating as conditions warmed near the end of the Ice Age. Yet during the period of the footprints, water still remained, though reduced. This raises questions about how people perceived the landscape. Did they witness the gradual decline of the lake? Did stories form about shifting waters, about places remembered as once abundant, now dry? Archaeology cannot answer these directly, but the physical traces suggest human adaptation to shifting shores. The scale of migration continues to impress. From origins in northeastern Asia, groups had crossed Beringia, moved through Alaska, and somehow reached the heart of the continent by this time. That distance spans thousands of kilometers. The lakeshore of Otero was not an isolated destination, but a waypoint in vast human journeys. Each site discovered across the Americas, Chile's Monteverde, Brazil's Serra da Capivara, Canada's Bluefish Caves, adds to a tapestry of arrival. White Sands is one thread, yet one of the most direct, for it shows feet upon the earth rather than tools left behind. Today, the gypsum dunes shift silently over the basin. Wind carries fine grains that once lay at the bottom of Lake Otero. The lake is gone, its water long evaporated, yet beneath the sand the tracks remain. They are uncovered only under precise conditions, when erosion exposes them, and scientists race to record before wind erases once again. Each footprint is fragile, its edges delicate. Preservation is fleeting, reminding us that what survives from the deep past is always partial, always at risk of vanishing. And yet, even with these limits, the footprints endure as testimony. They show that human beings did not merely endure the Ice Age, they lived, moved, and left ordinary traces in extraordinary times. Along ancient shore, they walked as families, leaving paths in mud that became records of migration. These are the oldest known footprints in the Americas, and they whisper across time that long before glaciers retreated, humanity had already reached far into new lands. The lakes are gone, the shores erased, but the memory remains in sediment, a quiet record of journeys across water's edge. Across the Americas, scattered traces hint at people who lived long before the end of the Ice Age. The White Sands footprints are one striking piece, but they are not alone. Archaeological sites from Alaska to South America have revealed stone tools, butchered bones, and hearths that point to a human presence far earlier than once thought. For much of the 20th century, the prevailing view was that people arrived only about 13,000 years ago, associated with the so-called Clovis culture. These early hunters were named after distinctive fluted spear points found across North America. The Clovis first model suggested that humans entered after ice sheets retreated, then spread rapidly southward. Yet discoveries in the late 20th and early 21st centuries began to erode this picture. At Bluefish Caves in the Yukon, bones of animals bear cut marks that may date back nearly 24,000 years. In Chile, at the site of Monteverde, preserved wooden structures and plant remains reveal human settlement more than 14,000 years ago, long before the rise of Clovis technology. In Brazil's Serra da Capivara, rock shelters show evidence of even earlier activity, though the dates remain contested. These findings point to a deeper, more complex history of arrival. The White Sands prints fit within this changing view. They are not isolated anomalies, but part of a broader pattern that places humans in the Americas well before the Clovis horizon. What makes them exceptional is their clarity. A footprint is difficult to dismiss. Stone tools can be displaced, bones can be reworked into younger sediments, but human tracks pressed into mud, dated by surrounding seeds, provide direct, undeniable testimony. They remind us that people were here, and they were not passing shadows but inhabitants who walked, carried, and played. A lesser-known detail comes from the study of tool traditions found far from white sands. Some early sites in North America show technologies distinct from Clovis, including stemmed points and simple flakes. These suggest that multiple traditions existed, perhaps brought by different waves of migrants or developed locally in response to diverse environments. This hints at cultural variety among the first Americans. Long before later, regional cultures took shape. The footprints at White Sands cannot reveal the tools these people used, but they remind us that behind every print was a group with its own traditions of survival. Mysteries persist, however. If humans were present in New Mexico 23,000 years ago, how widespread were they? Was this an isolated group or part of a broader settlement across the continent? Archaeologists continue to debate how large populations may have been. The scarcity of early sites could suggest small, scattered bands. Yet it may also reflect the difficulty of preserving evidence over such vast spans of time. Much of the earliest activity likely occurred along coasts now submerged beneath post-glacial seas, leaving gaps in the visible record. Planetary forces again frame the story. At the height of the Ice Age, lower sea levels exposed continental shelves, expanding land along the Pacific and Atlantic coasts. These newly opened lands may have provided routes of travel, hunting grounds, and habitats now hidden beneath the ocean. The rising seas of later millennia drowned these landscapes, removing from view countless sites that might once have told the story of early migration. The footprints at White Sands thus stand as rare survivors from a world largely erased by changing climate. Step by step, the picture of early Americans becomes more intricate. They are not defined by a single culture, nor confined to a narrow window of time. Instead, evidence suggests a mosaic of groups, each adapting to local conditions, each leaving subtle traces. One group may have relied on coastal resources, harvesting fish and shellfish along a Pacific shore. Another may have followed herds into interior valleys. Still others may have lingered in river basins, gathering plants and hunting smaller game. The White Sands people belong to this larger mosaic, one strand woven into a continent-wide story. Among scientists, debates continue. Some remain cautious, questioning dates or seeking alternative explanations. Others see the growing weight of evidence pointing toward a much earlier human presence. This scientific process reflects the challenge of reconstructing deep history. Fragile traces must be pieced together, tested, and retested. Each new discovery can shift the entire framework of understanding. The footprints are not the final word, but part of an unfolding conversation that stretches across disciplines, from archaeology to genetics, from geology to climatology. The scale of migration under consideration is immense. To imagine humans in New Mexico during the last glacial maximum is to imagine journeys across thousands of kilometers of varied terrain, grasslands, glaciers, rivers, deserts. It is to picture generations moving through landscapes no human had known before, adapting at each step. Compared to the span from Paris to Seoul, the distance from Beringia to the American Southwest is similar, perhaps greater, and it was traversed without maps, written records, or metal tools. The feat is one of endurance and persistence, written not in monuments but in footprints. The broader context of extinction also shadows these discoveries. Many of the animals whose tracks mingle with human prints are gone. Mammoths, ground sloths, and ancient camels once shared the land but disappeared as climates warmed and human presence spread. Their absence today deepens the poignancy of the footprints, for they capture a moment when humans walked alongside creatures that no longer exist. The record is therefore both evidence of life and reminder of loss. In the quiet dunes of New Mexico, the footprints remain fragile. Scientists cover them after study to preserve what they can. Wind and rain continue their slow erosion, yet the knowledge they provide endures. They tell us that the history of the Americas is older than once believed, more complex, and more human in its details. Across the continent, other traces wait: stone flakes in Yukon caves, charred wood in Chile, painted shelters in Brazil. Each piece adds to the growing recognition that the Americas were peopled not in a single moment, but through long, layered processes. The White Sands site is a beacon within this landscape of discovery, illuminating a time when families walked along a vanished lake under the shadow of glaciers. Far away, the story expands, but here it narrows to the pressure of a foot upon wet ground. One step, then another, recorded in silence for millennia. The question of where the people of White Sands came from leads back across continents. Genetic research carried out in the past 2 decades has transformed our understanding of the first Americans. Studies of ancient DNA, extracted from human remains found in Siberia and the Americas, reveal a shared ancestry that traces to a small founding population. These ancestors separated from other groups in Asia tens of thousands of years ago, and for a time they lived in isolation, forming what scientists call the Beringian standstill. This idea suggests that early populations paused for many generations in the region of Beringia, the land bridge that once connected Siberia to Alaska. During the Ice Age, lower seas exposed a vast expanse of land here, an area larger than modern France. Far from a narrow corridor, Beringia was a world of its own, with steppe grasslands, rivers, and herds of animals. It was cold, but not as forbidding as the glaciers to the south. In this environment, small human groups endured, carrying genetic lineages that would later spread across the Americas. One lesser-known detail comes from studies of microblades and small stone tools found in Siberia, similar to those uncovered in early Alaskan sites. These technological links suggest that the people who eventually crossed into the Americas carried not only their genes, but also knowledge of tool-making traditions suited for hunting and processing resources in harsh conditions. Such continuity reinforces the genetic evidence, weaving material culture into the story of migration. Yet, mysteries remain. Exactly when the migration into the Americas occurred is still debated. Genetic clocks, methods of estimating timing by counting mutations, suggest that the founding population split from other Asians roughly 25,000 years ago. But archaeological sites, such as White Sands, show people deep in the continent by 23,000 years ago. Did migration southward begin earlier than the genetic models imply, or do the models need refining? The puzzle illustrates how evidence from different fields must be balanced carefully, each providing clues but none complete on its own. Planetary conditions again shaped possibilities. During the last glacial maximum, the ice sheets blocked interior passageways, making southern travel difficult. But the exposed coasts of Beringia and Alaska offered another route. Vast kelp forests lined the Pacific shoreline, creating what some scientists call the kelp highway. These ecosystems provided abundant fish, shellfish, sea mammals, and birds, sustaining human groups moving along the coast. Boats may have been simple, perhaps rafts or skin-covered frames, but they would have been enough to cross rivers and small straits. If people followed this marine path, they could have reached lower latitudes well before the ice-free corridors opened. The scale of such a migration is daunting. From Siberia into Alaska, then along thousands of kilometers of unfamiliar coastline, the journey may have spanned centuries. Yet human adaptability is evident in the genetic record itself. Today, indigenous peoples across North and South America share ancestry that traces back to these first groups. Despite later diversification into countless cultures and languages, a common thread runs through, linking communities from the Arctic tundra to the Amazon rainforest. At White Sands, the footprints offer a tangible connection to this deeper story. Each impression in mud belongs to descendants of those who once waited in Beringia. The children who ran beside the lake carried within them the genetic legacy of ancient Siberian ancestors. Their presence in New Mexico during the Ice Age shows how far that legacy had traveled. It is a reminder that migration is not a single leap, but a series of steps across generations. One unresolved question concerns whether more than one migration occurred. Some genetic studies suggest that all indigenous peoples of the Americas descend from a single founding population. Others argue that additional waves may have contributed, bringing slight variations in genetic markers or languages. Archaeology also hints at complexity, with tool traditions differing across regions. The debate remains open, reflecting how much is still unknown about these early movements. On a planetary scale, the Beringian pause fits into a larger rhythm of glacial cycles. During colder periods, seas fell, exposing land bridges. During warmer interludes, seas rose, drowning them again. For humans, these shifts determine possibilities. The ancestors of the first Americans likely crossed during a window when seas were low and coasts were walkable. Later, rising waters submerged Beringia, cutting off land passage and leaving only ocean between continents. What was once a world of grass and river became the seafloor of the Bering Strait. Step by step, the story of migration moved south. Families followed rivers, skirted glaciers, and perhaps paddled along shores. Each new valley or bay was unknown, requiring careful observation and adaptation. Plants had to be tested, animals tracked, and weather learned. In this way, human groups carried knowledge forward, adding to traditions with each new generation. The footprints in New Mexico, so far from Siberia, testify to the success of this gradual, persistent process. In the present, researchers continue to refine the picture. Ancient DNA extracted from a child buried in Alaska around 11,000 years ago shows close relation to all later indigenous groups, confirming the deep roots of shared ancestry. Other genomes from Siberia reveal the mixing of populations that contributed to the founding group. These studies are ongoing, expanding with each new discovery. Yet they all point back to Beringia as the cradle of American ancestry. For those who walk the gypsum sands, this vast history was carried within them. They did not know of genetic lineages or glacial cycles. They simply lived, adapting to lake shores, hunting animals, gathering plants. Yet their lives are inseparable from global processes, the rise and fall of seas, the expansion of ice, the pathways of migration. The White Sands footprints are thus more than impressions in mud. They are records of journeys that began half a world away, in the frozen grasslands of a land now drowned. Far away, across continents and centuries, the origins of the first Americans converge in Beringia. And from that beginning, step by step, the story unfolds across an entire hemisphere. The land bridge of Beringia once linked continents. During the height of the Ice Age, sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than today, exposing a vast plain between Siberia and Alaska. This plain was not barren ice, as once imagined, but a broad grassland steppe stretching hundreds of kilometers. Rivers meandered through it. Patches of shrubs dotted the horizon. Herds of mammoth, horse, and bison roamed its expanse. For thousands of years, human groups lived within this world, adapting to its extremes. Archaeologists describe Beringia as both corridor and homeland. It was a passage between continents, but also a place where people lingered, perhaps for millennia. Genetic evidence suggests a prolonged isolation here, a standstill in which populations remained relatively small and separate from other groups in Asia. They endured through cycles of cold and relative warmth, hunting animals of the steppe and fishing along rivers. Seasonal migrations may have carried them across open plains in summer, then back to sheltered valleys in winter. One lesser-known detail concerns the vegetation of Beringia. Pollen studies show that it was neither dense forest nor barren tundra, but a unique ecosystem scientists call the mammoth steppe. This biome, now vanished, supported both grazing animals and the predators who followed them. For humans, it offered a mosaic of resources: bones for tools, hides for shelter, meat for sustenance, and rivers teeming with fish. This environment sustained not only people but also the great herds that defined Ice Age life. Yet mysteries remain about how long humans stayed here. Some scholars suggest they occupied Beringia for thousands of years, isolated by advancing glaciers that blocked the path south. Others argue that migration into the Americas began earlier, with groups slipping along coasts before the ice closed in. Archaeology in the far north is difficult. Permafrost, shifting rivers, and rising seas have obscured many sites. What evidence survives is fragmentary: stone tools, scattered bones, ancient campsites revealed by erosion. Still, these traces confirm that people were present, and that Beringia was more than a simple crossing. Planetary forces once again shaped their world. The last glacial maximum pressed ice sheets southward, sealing routes through Canada. Winds carried loess, fine dust, across the steppe, enriching soils but also creating harsh storms. Summers were brief, winters long. Yet compared to the frozen glaciers, Beringia remained habitable. Some regions may even have been refuges of relative warmth, where grasses persisted and animals thrived. In this sense, Beringia was both boundary and sanctuary. Step by step, human groups made lives here. They built temporary shelters of bone and hide, clustered near rivers or along ridges. They hunted bison, their tracks mingling with herds across muddy ground. They gathered plants in the brief summer, storing what they could. Fire provided warmth and protection against long nights. Children played in the shelter of dunes. The picture is quiet, but within it lies resilience. Survival here required skill, memory, and adaptation passed from one generation to the next. The scale of this homeland is often overlooked. Beringia stretched from eastern Siberia to western Alaska, a land larger than many nations. Crossing it on foot would have taken weeks, even months. To live within it for centuries is to imagine a world with its own rhythms, its own migrations, its own stories. When the seas rose after the Ice Age, all of this vanished beneath the Bering Strait. What was once grassland became ocean, erasing much of the human record. One unresolved mystery concerns the timing of departure. Did groups leave Beringia as soon as opportunities appeared? Or did some remain until the very end? Genetic studies suggest that once populations moved south, they expanded rapidly across the Americas. Within a few thousand years, people were present from Alaska to the southern tip of South America. Such rapid spread implies either a long build-up of knowledge and numbers in Beringia or multiple pulses of migration over time. Archaeologists continue to debate which scenario fits best. On a planetary scale, Beringia illustrates how much sea level change reshapes human history. When glaciers locked water, continents were connected. When ice melted, seas rose, drowning lands and severing links. Across the world, similar processes unfolded. Southeast Asia, the continent of Sunderland, connected islands that are now separate. In Europe, Doggerland linked Britain to the mainland. All of these worlds disappeared beneath rising waters, erasing landscapes where people once lived. Beringia is part of this broader story, a vanished continent that played a crucial role in humanity's spread. The legacy of Beringia lives on in genetics, languages, and cultures. Indigenous peoples of the Americas carry within them the ancestry of those who once walked its grasslands. Though the land itself is gone, its memory endures in the footprints of descendants across 2 continents. The White Sands tracks are one expression of that legacy, distant in space but linked by lineage. From Beringia to New Mexico, the journey spans thousands of kilometers, yet it is one continuous thread. Today, the Bering Strait is a narrow channel of cold water. Few who sail across imagine the plains that once lay beneath. Yet science reconstructs this lost world, piecing together its climate, ecology, and human history. Each pollen core, each ancient bone, each genetic sequence adds detail to the picture. The image that emerges is of a vibrant land sustaining both people and animals, bridging continents for a time, then vanishing into the sea. Step by step, the story moves onward. From the frozen grasslands of Beringia, people carry their lives into new lands. Southward, beyond glaciers, they find valleys, rivers, and lake shores waiting. The White Sands footprints are one distant outcome of this migration, pressed into mud long after the first steps left Beringia behind. Far away now, the land bridge lies hidden, but in memory and evidence it remains, the great threshold between Asia and the Americas. Beyond the narrow strip of Beringia lay a continent transformed by ice. North America during the last glacial maximum was a patchwork of environments, each shaped by cold, wind, and shifting ecosystems. Vast portions of the north were buried beneath kilometers of glacial ice, white expanses stretching to the horizon. Yet farther south, open grasslands spread, dotted with scattered woodlands and wetlands. Here, giant animals roamed, creatures that no longer exist, yet once defined the landscape. This was the Mammoth Steppe, an ecosystem that stretched not only across North America, but also through Eurasia. It was the most extensive biome of the Ice Age world, linking continents through shared species and conditions. Grasses and herbs dominated, supporting herds of mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, horse, and bison. Predators such as lions, wolves, and short-faced bears prowled the margins. In the America, additional giants appeared, ground sloths the size of elephants, camels that browsed on shrubs, and armadillos with shells like small cars. Humans entering this environment encountered a richness of life unmatched by modern grasslands. At White Sands, traces of this vanished world survive in the mingled footprints of people and animals. Scientists have documented sloth tracks overlapping with human prints, suggesting moments of encounter. In one instance, sloth tracks curve sharply as if the animal reared on its hind legs, perhaps sensing human presence. Nearby, mammoth tracks press deep into ancient mud. These intersections remind us that Ice Age humans did not live apart from megafauna. They moved within the same spaces, navigating risks and opportunities alike. One lesser-known detail from the fossil record is the evidence of ancient camel remains in North America. Today, camels are associated with deserts of Asia and Africa, but they evolved here first, roaming the Ice Age plains alongside mammoths. Some eventually crossed into Asia through Beringia, giving rise to the lineages still alive today. For humans, these animals were part of the same environment that shaped survival choices. The presence of such species emphasizes how different Ice Age North America was from the continent we know now. Mysteries endure about how humans interacted with this megafauna. Did they actively hunt mammoths and sloths, or mostly scavenge their remains? Some sites show cut marks on bones, suggesting butchery. Others suggest opportunistic use. It may be that strategies varied depending on group size, season, and circumstance. The footprints at White Sands do not tell us whether people hunted these giants, but they show proximity. Humans and large animals shared the same lake margins, leaving overlapping tracks in soft ground. On a planetary scale, this was an age of giants. Across continents, megafauna dominated ecosystems. In Australia, diprotodons and giant kangaroos roamed. In Eurasia, mammoths and woolly rhinos persisted. South America hosted its own immense sloths and armored glyptodonts. Humanity lived among these creatures for millennia. Yet within a few thousand years after the Ice Age ended, most were gone. The causes remain debated: climate change, human hunting, or a combination of both. The footprints of White Sands capture a fleeting moment within this broader pattern of coexistence and loss. Step by step, one can imagine daily encounters. A group walks along a lakeshore, their tracks pressed beside those of a sloth. The animal senses their presence, turning suddenly. Farther out, a mammoth herd grazes, leaving deep impressions in wet earth. Birds flock overhead, attracted to the water. Children run, unafraid, across paths, trampled by creatures many times their size. For the humans, this was ordinary life, not spectacle. It was the world as they knew it, abundant, unpredictable, and full of both promise and danger. Archaeologists studying the megafauna of the Ice Age emphasize the adaptability required of humans. Hunting strategies differed from those later used against smaller animals. Large game demanded cooperation, planning, and risk. Tools had to be designed for penetration of thick hides. Fires may have been used to guide herds. Yet alongside these challenges, people also relied on smaller resources: fish, birds, rabbits, and plants. The picture is one of flexibility rather than reliance on a single food source. The footprints at White Sands show family group, not specialized hunting parties, reinforcing the idea that daily life was varied. One unresolved scientific question concerns the role of humans in the extinction of these giants. Some researchers argue that hunting pressure, even at low population densities, could have driven megafauna toward decline. Others point to rapid warming at the end of the Ice Age, which transformed habitats and stressed populations. The debate continues, with evidence pointing to combined causes. The White Sands site provides no answer, but it grounds the discussion in lived reality, people and megafauna side by side on the same ground. On a global scale, Ice Age ecosystems reveal the interconnectedness of climate and life. As glaciers advanced, grasslands expanded. As ice retreated, forests returned, squeezing out steppe species. Humans moved within these shifts, adapting to each phase. The Americas were not exceptions but part of a worldwide pattern of transformation. To see human footprints beside sloth tracks in New Mexico is to glimpse one small intersection within a planet-wide drama. Today, the gypsum dunes appear empty. No mammoths roam their ridges, no sloths leave clawed impressions. Yet beneath the sand lie reminders that this land was once alive with giants. For archaeologists, each track is fragile, preserved only under special conditions. Wind may erase them, water may dissolve them. Yet while they last, they tell a story that tools alone cannot, that humans walked directly among Ice Age creatures, ordinary and immense at the height of glacial times. The mammoth steppe has vanished. The animals are gone, but the footprints endure, carrying quiet testimony of coexistence. They show that the first Americans were not strangers to giants. They lived among them, adapted to their presence, and left behind traces that survived long after the creatures themselves disappeared. Far away, the mammoth herds move across the horizon. Here, at the edge of a vanished lake, people and giants walk together, their steps mingling in mud that would hold their memory for thousands of years. To move southward from Beringia was not simple. The continent was divided by walls of ice. The Laurentide ice sheet pressed from the east, and the Cordilleran ice sheet from the west. Between them, mountains and glaciers stretched for thousands of kilometers. At the peak of the last glacial maximum, no clear path opened through. For years, researchers believed that humans entered the heart of the continent only after these ice masses retreated, leaving a corridor along present-day Alberta. But the White Sands footprints challenge that view. If people stood in New Mexico 23,000 years ago, they must have arrived long before the corridor was viable. Still, questions about the timing of openings remain. Geological studies reveal that the ice-free corridor may have become passable by about 14 to 15,000 years ago, but not earlier. This means that people in New Mexico could not have reached the site by moving through the interior corridor at the time the footprints were made. Instead, they must have found other paths, perhaps long before the ice sheets locked completely, or along routes at the edges of glaciers. One lesser-known detail is the evidence of small mountain passes along the margins of the Cordilleran ice sheet. In certain periods, these ranges were not fully sealed, and valleys provided temporary passage. For humans skilled in moving across rugged terrain, these openings might have served as hidden routes southward. Archaeologists are investigating such possibilities, though direct evidence remains scarce. The challenge is that glacial movement often erases traces of human activity, grinding landscapes clean. The mystery deepens when considering coastal pathways. Along the Pacific, glaciers reached the sea, but offshore islands and refuges may have offered stepping stones. Kelp forests, rich in marine resources, lined the coast. If people traveled by small boats, they could have skirted the ice, moving south along shores that are now drowned beneath the ocean. Archaeological exploration of submerged coastlines is difficult, but ongoing. Each new find has potential to reshape understanding of how the Americas were peopled. On a planetary scale, the opening and closing of ice corridors was part of glacial cycles. As temperatures fluctuated, ice sheets advanced or retreated by hundreds of kilometers. A warming phase could thin ice, allowing water to carve valleys. A cooling phase could close those same paths within centuries. For humans, these shifts meant that opportunities were fleeting. A pass open to one generation might be blocked to the next. Migration required timing, observation, and flexibility. Step by step, one can imagine the challenge. Families approached ranges of ice, their peaks rising like white cliffs. Valleys were filled with glacial meltwater, cold and fast. Snowstorms swept across plains, obscuring vision. To find a way through demanded patience. Groups may have lingered at the edges, watching for seasons when ice retreated. They followed rivers to their sources, seeking routes around frozen barriers. Each path carried risk, yet also promise of new lands beyond. Archaeological traces suggest that people did indeed find such ways. At sites in Western Canada, tools and bones dated to more than 14,000 years ago suggest early passage. At the Bluefish Caves farther north, even earlier presence has been argued. These pieces indicate that humans did not wait for a perfect corridor, but moved when and where opportunities arose. The White Sands prints, deep within the continent, confirm that such journeys were possible long before the ice fully melted. One unresolved question is whether movement south occurred in one great migration or in many smaller waves. Genetic evidence points to a founding population that spread widely, but archaeological differences in tools suggest diversity. It may be that some groups moved inland through mountain valley, while others skirted along coasts. Over generations, their paths converged, filling the continent with varied traditions. The footprints at White Sands are silent about which path was taken, but they prove the destination was reached. Planetary scale also reminds us of distance. From Beringia to New Mexico is thousands of kilometers, a span longer than the journey from Madrid to Moscow. Crossing such distances without metal, maps, or permanent roads required resilience. Yet Ice Age humans had already adapted to harsh environments across Eurasia and beyond. They knew how to read landscapes, follow animal tracks, and observe seasonal changes. The footprints are the end result of knowledge accumulated across continents and centuries. Today, the mountains of Alaska and Western Canada show scars of glaciers long vanished. Valleys carved by ice now hold forests and rivers. What was once a frozen barrier is today a living landscape. Yet beneath the soil, evidence of earlier times remains. Researchers continue to study sediments, pollen, and ancient DNA preserved in lakes and caves. These reveal shifting ecologies, marking when corridors opened or closed. Such studies are crucial for tracing the paths of early migration. The White Sands site ties this evidence together. By standing 23,000 years ago, the footprints force reconsideration of glacial geography. They suggest that humans did not wait at northern margins but moved into the continent at a time when pathways were thought closed, whether by coastal route, mountain pass, or earlier windows of opportunity. They found a way. The tracks are proof of success, pressed into mud at the heart of the Ice Age. Far away now, the glaciers retreat, leaving behind valleys and lakes. But in this section of the story, they still tower over the horizon. People walk beneath their shadow, seeking routes southward. Some corridors are sealed, others briefly open. The journey continues, uncertain yet unbroken, step by step through a world of ice and stone. Along the edge of the Pacific, another possibility emerges. While the inland corridor remained closed by glaciers, the shoreline may have provided a route south. Archaeologists call this idea the coastal highway hypothesis. It suggests that the first Americans traveled not through the heart of the continent, but along its rim, moving by sea and shore, following kelp forests that stretched for thousands of kilometers. During the last glacial maximum, sea levels were lower and the continental shelf lay exposed, where there are now rocky cliffs and narrow beaches. Broad plains once stretched toward the ocean. Rivers carved valleys into these plains, and islands dotted the coast. For humans with knowledge of simple watercraft, this environment offered both challenges and opportunities. Glaciers pressed down to the sea in many places, but between them were ice-free refuges, stretches of coast where plants grew, animals gathered, and people could land. A lesser-known detail is the richness of the kelp forests themselves. These underwater ecosystems provide more than shelter for fish. They host shellfish, sea urchins, birds, and sea mammals. For human travelers, they formed a continuous belt of resources from Northeast Asia through Alaska and down the Pacific coast of the Americas. Some scientists call it the Kelp Highway, emphasizing how it could have sustained migration across immense distances. Yet mysteries remain. Archaeological evidence for coastal migration is difficult to find. Most early sites that would have existed along the shore are now submerged, drowned beneath rising seas after the Ice Age. Submerged landscapes are hard to access and harder still to excavate. Divers and underwater archaeologists continue to search, but so far only a few sites hint at early coastal presence. Stone tools on islands off California and traces of settlement in British Columbia suggest ancient seafaring, but definitive proof of the earliest migrations remains elusive. On a planetary scale, coastal pathways were not unique to the Americas. Humans had long used shorelines as corridors. The migration into Australia more than 50,000 years ago required sea crossings. Islands across Southeast Asia were colonized by similar means. The Pacific coast of the Americas fits into this broader pattern, showing that humans repeatedly turned to the sea as a path of movement. The White Sands footprints, far inland, may have been left by descendants of groups who first arrived by such a route. Step by step, the coastal journey can be imagined. Families move along the shoreline, gathering shellfish at low tide. Small boats, perhaps made of wood and hide, carry people across inlets. Fires burn on rocky beaches, drying fish and warming bodies against cold winds. Glaciers gleam in the distance, their white walls plunging into the ocean. Yet between these icy tongues lie sheltered bays, green with vegetation, alive with birds. These become resting places, seasonal camps, stepping stones in a longer journey south. Archaeologists studying this hypothesis emphasize the adaptability required. Coastal living demands knowledge of tides, currents, and marine resources. Tools for fishing, gathering, and boat building must be crafted from available materials. The archaeological record, though fragmentary, hints at such skills. Bone fishhooks, shell middens, and watercraft from later periods demonstrate that ancient peoples mastered these techniques. It is reasonable to infer that earlier migrants possessed similar knowledge. One unresolved question is how far south coastal migration could have extended before inland expansion occurred. Some argue that humans reached South America by following the coast rapidly, within only a few millennia. Sites such as Monte Verde in Chile, dating more than 14,000 years ago, support this possibility. Others suggest a slower process, with groups settling along the way, then moving inland through river valleys. The footprints at White Sands, dating thousands of years earlier, imply that inland expansion began surprisingly soon. The scale of this coastal route is immense. From Beringia to southern Chile is more than 15,000 kilometers, longer than the distance from London to Cape Town. To imagine humans moving along this span during the Ice Age is to grasp the persistence of migration. Generation after generation, small groups advanced, each leaving traces that are now mostly hidden beneath the sea. The white sands tracks are therefore not isolated. They are echoes of a movement that encompassed an entire hemisphere. On a planetary level, the rising seas after the Ice Age erased coastal plains across the world. In Southeast Asia, Sunderland vanished. In Europe, Doggerland disappeared beneath the North Sea. Along the Americas, the Kelp Highway sank beneath waves. The loss of these lands makes reconstruction difficult. What survives are inland sites, like white sands, which preserve evidence left away from drowned coasts. Yet the patterns of human movement suggest that the sea was central, a partner in migration, guiding footsteps south. Today, archaeologists continue to investigate submerged landscapes. Sonar surveys map ancient river channels now underwater. Divers explore caves and reefs for tools or bones. Each discovery has the potential to confirm what the footprints already imply, that humans reached deep into the Americas earlier than once believed, and that the coast was likely their first pathway. Step by step, the story unfolds. People gather shellfish, dry seaweed, and watch the tide. Children play along beaches, leaving footprints in sand that will soon be washed away. Adults paddle small boats, scanning for the next refuge. Beyond each headland lies another bay, another island, another opportunity. Over centuries, these movements carry families far south, until some reach the interior valleys where lakes like Otero shimmer. The footprints in New Mexico are inland, but they connect to this maritime world. They are the outcome of journeys that may have begun along icy coasts, where kelp swayed beneath waves and glaciers towered over the shore. From sea to sand, from coast to desert, the path of migration wove across ecosystems. Each environment demanded adaptation. Each left subtle traces, fragile yet enduring. Far away now, the kelp forests still wave in cold Pacific waters, but the people who once followed them inland left their steps in gypsum mud. These steps remain, quiet reminders that the first Americans may have walked from the sea to the heart of a continent long before glaciers yielded their inland corridors. The footprints themselves form the heart of the white sands discovery. Pressed into soft mud along the margins of Lake Otero, they survive as silent impressions of ordinary life, layer by layer. They were buried by sediment, sealed beneath the shifting surface of the ancient lake. Thousands of years later, winds uncovered them, leaving delicate outlines visible across the gypsum flats. Scientists record each with care, scanning and photographing before erosion erases them again. The tracks are more than scattered marks. They form trails, sequences of steps that reveal motion and intention. Some extend for hundreds of meters, winding along the former shoreline. In places, footprints overlap, showing repeated crossings. Elsewhere, sets diverge, marking individuals who walked alone. The clarity is striking: heels, arches, and toes preserved in fine detail. Even the slip of a foot in wet ground can still be seen, a reminder of the human body behind each print. One lesser-known detail lies in the seeds embedded within the same layers. These are from a species of aquatic grass once common in the lake. Because organic material like seeds can be radiocarbon dated, they provide precise ages for the prints. Analyses consistently show that the footprints are more than 23,000 years old. This makes them the oldest confirmed human tracks in the Americas, predating the Clovis culture by many millennia. yet mysteries remain. Some researchers question whether radiocarbon dating of seeds might yield misleading results. If the seeds absorbed older carbon from groundwater, others accept the dates but debate what they imply. Were these people permanent residents or visitors who passed seasonally? The prints provide presence but not permanence. The absence of tools or camp remains nearby leaves room for interpretation. Still, the sheer number of tracks suggests repeated activity, not a single fleeting event. On a planetary scale, the preservation of footprints is extraordinary. Normally, such impressions vanish within days or hours. Rain erodes them. Wind smooths them. New layers of sediment bury them unevenly. For them to survive for more than 20,000 years requires rare alignment of conditions, fine-grained mud, rapid burial, stable layers, and eventual re-exposure. Similar sites exist in other parts of the world. Famous examples in East Africa record early hominins walking across volcanic ash. White Sands joins this select group, offering a direct record of movement that no tool or artifact can convey. Step by step, one can follow the tracks as if walking beside their makers. A line of adult prints moves steadily forward, the stride even, the pace unhurried. Smaller prints run alongside, irregular and quick. At one point, the deeper impressions of a burden appear, where someone carried weight across soft ground. In another area, prints veer sharply, perhaps to avoid puddles or animal tracks. The scene is vivid not because of imagination, but because of the record itself, pressed into mud with startling fidelity. Archaeologists emphasize how footprints reveal behavior in ways artifacts cannot. A stone tool shows skill, but not the motion of its maker. A bone reveals diet, but not daily movement. Footprints show the rhythm of walking, the spacing of steps, the presence of children, the carrying of loads. They offer a snapshot of life in motion, fleeting yet enduring across millennia. One unresolved question is how many individuals left the tracks. Estimates vary, depending on how trails overlap. Some sequences suggest a small group of perhaps a dozen. Others may indicate repeated visits by larger numbers over time. Without clear beginnings and endings, the exact count is uncertain. But what matters is the presence of families, adults and children together, reminding us that migration was not solely the work of hunters, but of entire communities. The scale of the discovery reaches beyond White Sands. Across the world, footprints provide rare but powerful evidence. At Happisburgh in England, early humans walked along estuaries nearly 1 million years ago. In Tanzania, hominins left trails across ash at Laetoli more than 3 million years ago. These sites capture brief moments that illuminate vast histories. White Sands belongs in this lineage, one of the oldest and clearest records in the Americas, expanding our view of human presence on the continent. Step by step, the White Sands prints tie together themes of migration, adaptation, and survival. They show that people had reached deep into the continent long before glaciers withdrew. They show that families, not only hunters, made the journey. They show that ordinary life, walking, carrying, running, was the essence of survival. In their simplicity lies their strength. Today, the gypsum dunes are stark, the basin dry. Visitors may see only white ridges rolling into the distance, yet beneath the surface, fragile traces remain, invisible until conditions reveal them. Scientists cover prints after study to protect them from erosion. Knowing that each is irreplaceable, the task is urgent, for wind and water continue their slow work of erasure. Each footprint preserved is a piece of deep history, rescued before it vanishes. On a global scale, Guy, discoveries like white sands remind us of how much of prehistory lies hidden. For every footprint that survives, countless others are lost. For every site uncovered, many remain buried or drowned. The story of humanity is fragmentary, stitched together from what chance has spared. Yet sometimes, as in the gypsum flats of New Mexico, the fragments speak clearly. They tell of lives lived, steps taken, journeys made. Far away, the footprints fade into sand. But here, for a brief moment, they are visible. Shadows of feet pressed into mud long ago. They endure as the oldest known human tracks in the Americas, anchors of evidence in a history still being pieced together. Each step is both fragile and enduring, a whisper of presence carried across 23,000 years. Beyond their scientific value, the white sands footprints open a rare window into daily life. They are not only traces of migration or evidence of survival, but direct signs of ordinary human activity. Each impression tells something small yet significant. Some tracks show children moving in playful arcs, their steps scattered and light. Others reveal moments of pause, where a foot pressed deeper as someone stopped, shifted weight, or turned suddenly. One long sequence appears to show a person carrying something heavy. These prints are elongated, the balance uneven, the depth greater than surrounding steps. Such details bring the Ice Age world into focus, not in abstractions of settlement or migration, but in moments of human motion, captured without intent, preserved by chance. The variety of footprints suggests a group of mixed ages and roles. Adults moved in steady lines, their strides measured and consistent. Children darted beside them, their tracks irregular, at times overlapping, at times running ahead. In one stretch, a child's prints cross and recross those of an adult, as if alternating between independence and closeness. Archaeologists studying these patterns recognize the social reality they reflect. Migration was not the work of lone hunters, but of families. Men, women, and children all walked these paths together, sharing burdens, dangers, and the simple rhythm of daily life. A lesser-known detail lies in the layering of the prints. Some footprints lie directly atop others, separated by fine bands of silt and clay. This means the tracks were not all made in a single day. Instead, the same routes were followed over weeks, months, or even seasons. Families returned to the lakeshore repeatedly, walking the same ground at different times. The lakeside was more than a crossing, it was a familiar place, one that anchored movement through the wider landscape. Still, mysteries remain. Why were so many tracks concentrated here, rather than scattered more widely? Was the lakeshore a preferred path between camps? Was it a place where resources were gathered, reeds for weaving, plants for food, animals for hunting? Or was it simply the easiest route across damp flats? Archaeology cannot yet answer these questions. The footprints record presence, but not intention. Interpretation must come from comparison with other sites and from ecological context. Even so, the intimacy of the evidence is undeniable. The prints belong to real individuals, not abstractions, and they record moments of existence that otherwise would have been lost. On a planetary scale, the preservation of such detail underscores how fragile the human record is. Vast migrations across continents have left only faint traces, a stone blade here, a fragment of bone there. Rarely do we glimpse behavior directly. Footprints are ephemeral, Normally they vanish within hours. Only under unusual conditions are they preserved, and even then, survival for thousands of years is almost miraculous. The White Sands prints therefore belong to a tiny set of discoveries worldwide that reveal human movement in such direct, physical form. Step by step, one can imagine the scene. A group walks along the lakeshore, the ground soft but firm enough to hold impressions. An adult carries a bundle, leaning forward under its weight, leaving deeper tracks. A child runs ahead, leaving uneven patterns that veer and loop. Another child lags behind, pressing both feet heavily into the mud, perhaps for fun, perhaps in reluctance. Birds rise suddenly from reeds, disturbed by movement. The lake glimmers in pale light, reflecting a sky washed by glacial winds. Air is cool, edged with the presence of ice far to the north. It is a picture of ordinariness, yet that is its power. It shows not hunters in dramatic pursuit, but families living daily lives at the edge of a vanished lake. Archaeologists stress the rarity of such scenes. While tools and bones speak of technology and diet, footprints reveal behavior in motion. They show the length of a stride, the weight of a burden, the presence of children. They show pace, steady or hurried, and direction, converging or diverging. They are dynamic evidence, snapshots of people in the act of living. At White Sands, the abundance of prints allows for patterns to be studied, turning fleeting actions into data about movement, grouping, and repetition. One unresolved question concerns the size of the group represented. Estimates vary widely. Some researchers see the tracks as belonging to a dozen or so individuals walking together. Others interpret the repeated layers as evidence of larger numbers passing over seasons. Without associated campsites or artifacts, it is difficult to know. But what can be said with certainty is that multiple generations were present. The mixture of adult and child prints shows families together, not isolated travelers. This alone changes how we view Ice Age migration, not as the march of solitary hunters, but as the steady movement of communities. On a global scale, the White Sands prints connect to other rare footprint sites. In Litoli, Tanzania, the prints of early hominins cross volcanic ash more than 3 million years old, showing small groups walking side by side. In Happisburgh, England, footprints nearly 1 million years old reveal ancient humans along estuarine mudflats. In Chile, tracks preserved in sand suggest early presence far to the south of the Americas. Each site is precious, for each shows behavior, not only artifacts. White Sands belongs to this lineage, offering a uniquely detailed glimpse into the Americas at the height of the Ice Age. Today, the gypsum flats are stark. The lake is gone, replaced by dunes of white sand stretching toward distant mountains. Visitors may see little more than ridges shaped by wind, yet beneath the surface lie delicate impressions of feet. Scientists work carefully, often reburying prints after study to shield them from erosion. Each footprint is fragile, its edges easily blurred by rain or wind. Preservation requires constant vigilance, for once a track is lost, no recovery is possible. The urgency of study is matched by the awareness that this record is finite. Step by step, the story emerges. The footprints show not only that people were present in New Mexico 23,000 years ago, but that they lived ordinary, social lives. They walked in groups, they carried burdens, they watched children play. These traces, so unassuming, are among the most powerful of all archaeological evidence. They remind us that prehistory is not only about migration routes and climatic shifts, but about human lives lived in detail, quiet, mundane, and enduring. far away. The dunes continue to shift. Winds cover and uncover the prints, just as time reveals and conceals the past. But beneath the sands, the tracks endure, fragile, intimate, irreplaceable, bearing across millennia the memory of children and adults who walk together along the shores of a vanished lake. The lake that once framed the footprints is gone. Lake Otero, vast and shallow, dried thousands of years ago, leaving behind the bright gypsum sands of southern New Mexico, where water once shimmered under Ice Age skies. Dunes now stretch in rolling waves, shifting with the wind. The landscape today appears barren, yet beneath it lies the memory of a vanished world. To understand the footprints, one must also consider the transformation of the lake itself and the forces that erased it. During the last glacial maximum, conditions in the American Southwest were cooler and wetter than today. Snowmelt from the surrounding mountains fed streams that drained into the basin, collecting in Lake Otero. The lake fluctuated in size, at times covering hundreds of square kilometers. Its shores supported reeds, aquatic plants, and wetlands, creating an oasis in an otherwise arid land. For humans, the lake offered food, water, and pathways. For animals, it was a gathering place, drawing herds of mammoth, camel, and sloth. The footprints preserved along its margins capture this abundance. A lesser-known detail about Lake Otero is the presence of small freshwater mollusks preserved in its sediments. Their shells, when analyzed, reveal shifts in water chemistry and climate. These subtle records show how the lake gradually changed, shrinking as temperatures rose and rainfall decreased. By the time glaciers began to retreat far to the north, Lake Otero was already declining. Its wetlands dried into salt flats. Its margins hardened into gypsum crusts. The footprints, preserved in these final phases, mark a moment near the end of the lake's life. Still, mysteries surround its disappearance. Was the drying of Lake Otero steady and gradual, or punctuated by sudden drops in water level? Some geologists argue for abrupt drainage, where outlets cut through sediments and released water downstream. Others see a slower process, tied to the gradual warming of the Holocene. For those who lived along its shores, the distinction mattered little. Each generation would have witnessed a landscape shifting, waterlines receding, resources dwindling. The white sands prints show that people were present during this transformation, adapting as the lake changed around them. On a planetary scale, Lake Otero was part of a broader pattern of pluvial lakes across the Great Basin and Southwest. During glacial times, cooler temperatures and altered rainfall created large inland seas where deserts lie today. Lake Bonneville in Utah, ancestor of the Great Salt Lake, once stretched more than 500 kilometers across. Lake Lahontan in Nevada filled valleys now dry. These lakes expanded and contracted with glacial cycles, responding to shifts in global climate. Lake Otero was smaller, but it shared in this rhythm. Its disappearance was one note in a worldwide symphony of change. Step by step, one can imagine life along the fading lake. Families walk across shrinking shorelines, leaving prints in mud exposed by retreating water. Children run along sandbars where reeds once grew. Hunters track animals that still come to drink at isolated pools. The abundance of earlier generations is diminished, but the lake remains a focal point, a place of memory as much as survival. The footprints are part of this story. not only of migration but of environmental change witnessed firsthand. Archaeologists studying the site emphasize how unusual it is to find direct evidence from this phase of transformation. Most pluvial lakes vanished without preserving human traces. At White Sands, the combination of fine gypsum mud and rapid burial captured moments that would otherwise be lost. The prints reveal not only where people walked, but when they did so during the twilight of Lake Otero, as Ice Age climates shifted toward modern aridity. One unresolved question is how people responded when the lake finally disappeared. Did they abandon the basin entirely, moving toward permanent rivers and springs? Did they adapt to desert life, following game across dunes and dry flats? Archaeology in the region is sparse, making it difficult to trace continuity. Later, cultures flourished in the American Southwest, but whether they descended directly from those who left footprints at Lake Otero is unknown. The link between Deep Ice Age presence and later traditions remains a gap in knowledge. On a global level, the loss of lakes and wetlands had profound effects on human societies. As waters receded, fertile shores vanished, forcing groups to seek new lands. Migration, adaptation, and innovation followed. In Africa, the drying of the Sahara transformed once green savannas into desert, redirecting human movement toward the Nile. In Asia, the retreat of pluvial lakes reshaped routes across central deserts. Lake Otero's disappearance fits into this planetary pattern, another example of how climate dictated human options. Today, the basin is filled with gypsum dunes, brilliant under sunlight. The wind shapes them constantly, erasing and remaking ridges. Beneath, the sediments hold the tracks of people and animals who lived in a different world. For visitors, the contrast is stark. What seems empty desert was once a living lake, teeming with waterfowl, fish, and herds. The footprints are fragile reminders of this transformation, silent witnesses to a vanished landscape. Step by step, the story of Lake Otero becomes clear. It rose with the cold and wet of the Ice Age, sustained families and animals for thousands of years, then faded as climate shifted. The footprints record human presence at the threshold of its disappearance. They are the last echoes of a lakeshore life, captured before wind and sun erased the water forever. Far away now, glaciers melt, seas rise, and climates shift again. But here, in the gypsum sands of New Mexico, the memory of a vanished lake endures, preserved in the fragile impressions of human feet pressed into mud more than 23,000 years ago. The White Sands footprints raise questions that reach beyond their immediate setting. If humans stood in New Mexico 23,000 years ago, how did they arrive so early? This problem lies at the center of debates in archaeology. For decades, the prevailing model held that people entered the Americas only after the retreat of ice sheets around 13,000 years ago. The Clovis culture, with its distinctive fluted spear points, was long considered the first chapter of American prehistory. But the footprints tell a different story. They demand that we reconsider timing, routes, and the pace of migration. One lesser-known detail emerges from other sites that challenge the old model. In southern Chile, the site of Monteverde preserves wooden structures, tools, and plant remains dated to more than 14,000 years ago. Farther north, in Brazil's Serra da Capivara, rock shelters contain evidence of even earlier human presence, though dates remain controversial. In Canada's Bluefish Caves, animal bones with cut marks may be as old as 24,000 years. These sites, scattered across the hemisphere, form a patchwork of evidence suggesting that people were present long before Clovis. The White Sands footprints fit firmly within this growing body of discoveries. Still, mysteries remain. If humans were in New Mexico during the last glacial maximum, did they represent a continuous population or a small group that disappeared and was later replaced? Archaeologists have yet to find permanent settlements or a full cultural record from this period in the southwest. The footprints prove presence, but they do not prove continuity. This ambiguity is part of the puzzle. It leaves open the possibility of multiple waves of migration, some early, some later, overlapping in time and space. On a planetary scale, the White Sands discovery reflects broader questions about how humans spread across the world. Migration was not a single event, but a process spanning millennia. Africa was left in waves. Eurasia filled in stages. Australia was reached by sea more than 50,000 years ago. The Americas were no exception. Instead of one entry point, there may have been many coastal routes, inland passages, island hopping along Pacific shores. The footprints remind us that humanity's spread was complex, layered, and not easily reduced to one model. Step by step, the contradictions sharpen. Genetic studies suggest that all indigenous peoples of the Americas descend from a common ancestral population that lived in or near Beringia. This finding supports a single origin. Yet archaeology shows diversity in tools and timing. How can both be true? Perhaps one founding population split into multiple groups soon after entering the continent, giving rise to varied traditions. Or perhaps additional small waves contributed new influences without erasing the genetic signal of the first. The footprints leave the question open. One unresolved scientific debate concerns whether people first entered the Americas before or during the last glacial maximum. If before, then they may have become isolated south of the ice sheets, cut off for thousands of years until glaciers receded. If during, then they must have found viable pathways earlier than geologists have recognized. Either possibility reshapes our view of early American history. The prints at White Sands, precisely dated to the glacial peak, press hard on both options, demanding explanations that fit the evidence. Another layer of mystery comes from the absence of tools at White Sands. Archaeologists expect to find stone points, scrapers, or blades alongside human activity, yet the footprints stand alone. Why? It may be that tools were left elsewhere, in camps now lost. Or perhaps the lakeshore was used for brief tasks, gathering plants, collecting water, rather than for activities that required tools. Whatever the reason, the silence of artifacts forces us to rely on footprints alone. They are eloquent in their way, but they leave much unsaid. On a global scale, but this uncertainty mirrors the challenges faced in other regions. In Australia, debate continues about whether people arrived by 40,000 years ago or earlier. In Europe, scholars argue about the coexistence of modern humans and Neanderthals. Everywhere, deep history is built from fragments, contested and reinterpreted with each new discovery. The White Sands site is part of this pattern. It does not settle arguments but adds to them, enriching the discussion with evidence too clear to dismiss. Step by step, the human story expands. People walked along a lake in New Mexico during the coldest phase of the Ice Age. That much is certain. The route they took to get there is unknown. The continuity of their descendants is uncertain. The cultural traditions they carried are invisible. yet the very existence of the footprints reshapes the framework. They remind us that the Americas were not empty until the end of the Ice Age. They were already inhabited, their landscapes already walked by human feet. One of the most striking planetary observations comes from sea level change. At the time of the White Sands prints, the oceans were more than 100 meters lower. The coastlines of the Americas were far to the west of their present positions. If people traveled along those coasts, their camps, tools, and traces now lie beneath the sea. This may explain why evidence is sparse. Entire chapters of early history are hidden underwater, awaiting technologies that can reveal them. The footprints, preserved inland, survive only because the lake captured them before wind erased them. Today, the debate over early migration continues. Some scholars emphasize caution, seeking multiple lines of evidence before revising timelines. Others embrace the growing weight of discoveries that point to earlier presence. White Sands stands in the center, undeniable in its clarity, yet enigmatic in its implications. It challenges models, reshapes arguments, and leaves room for further discoveries. Far away now, the dunes of gypsum shift under desert winds. Beneath them remain footprints pressed 23 millennia ago. They do not answer every question, but they ask them, forcefully and clearly. They ask how, when, and by what paths humans reached the heart of a continent during the Ice Age. They ask who these people were, and how their lives continued. They ask us to imagine, carefully and patiently, a past more complex than once believed. The White Sands footprints are one piece in a wider tapestry. Across the Americas, scattered sites suggest that people arrived in multiple waves at different times and by different routes. Each discovery adds a fragment, and together they create a picture more intricate than the once simple Clovis first model. Instead of a single migration, the evidence points toward layered arrivals, overlapping populations, and diverse adaptations. In South America, Monteverde in Chile provides some of the clearest proof of early settlement. Wooden structures, preserved under layers of peat, date to more than 14,000 years ago. Plant remains show that people gathered a wide variety of foods, from seaweed to tubers. Stone tools are present, but so are signs of broader activity: ropes, digging sticks, and hearths. This site demonstrates that human presence in South America was well established long before the Clovis horizon, and that communities lived in organized, sustained ways. Farther east, in Brazil's Serra da Capivara, rock shelters contain hearths and artifacts that some researchers date to more than 20,000 years ago. These claims remain controversial, with debates about whether the material is human-made. Yet even cautious interpretations place humans in the region earlier than once thought. If these dates hold, they suggest that groups reached South America by routes not yet fully understood. The sheer distance from Beringia underscores the scale of migration, rivaling the breadth of Eurasia itself. One lesser-known detail comes from sites in North America that preserve tools distinct from Clovis points. Stemmed projectile points found in the western United States and coastal regions resemble technologies seen in Asia and South America. This suggests either continuity from earlier traditions or multiple introductions of tool-making methods. Such differences reveal cultural variety among early Americans, not a single unified toolkit. Mysteries persist about how these waves of migration unfolded. Did one group move rapidly south along the coast, reaching Chile within a few centuries, while others remained in the north? Or did smaller bands spread gradually, filling regions step by step over millennia. Archaeologists debate whether rapid expansion or slow diffusion best explains the distribution of sites. The White Sands footprints, older than both Monte Verde and Clovis, complicate the picture further, showing that people were deep in the continent earlier than either model comfortably explains. On a planetary scale, the story mirrors human expansions elsewhere. In Eurasia, modern humans spread into Europe, Asia, and Australia in overlapping phases, each shaped by climate and geography. In Africa, populations expanded and contracted with the shifting of deserts and savannas. The Americas were part of this same process, with migration shaped by glacial cycles, coastlines, and mountains. The layered nature of settlement reflects humanity's global pattern, flexible, adaptive, and diverse. Step by step, the paths of these groups diverged and converged. Some moved inland, following rivers into the heart of continents. Others stayed near coasts, harvesting marine resources. Still others settled in valleys where plants and animals were abundant. Over time, these groups developed regional traditions, visible in tools, art, and subsistence strategies. The White Sands people were one such group, part of this larger mosaic, their lives preserved only in footprints, but connected to a hemisphere of movement. Archaeologists note that genetics provides both clarity and complication. Studies show that most indigenous peoples of the Americas share ancestry from a founding population that crossed from Asia. Yet slight variations in DNA suggest additional layers, perhaps separate waves, or mixing with groups who remained in the north. Linguistic diversity also hints at deep time, with languages branching into families that must have taken tens of thousands of years to develop. These threads point to a more complex history than a single entry. One unresolved question concerns the role of South America in early migration. Why do sites there appear so early, so far from Beringia? Did people move along the Pacific coast with surprising speed, covering thousands of kilometers in only a few centuries, or were their inland routes now obscured by geological change? Monte Verde shows presence, but not the route. White Sands shows presence, but not the origin. Together, they highlight gaps as much as answers.
On a global scale, I think, the disappearance of evidence is part of the challenge. And rising seas erased early coastal settlements, erosion and sediment buried inland camp. Fire, flood, and time destroyed fragile organic remains. What survives is fragmentary, enough to hint but not to complete the story. The White Sands prints are invaluable precisely because they escaped this fate. They are direct, undeniable, and datable.
Yet, they are only one thread among many, leaving us to reconstruct the tapestry with care. Today, the recognition of layered arrivals is reshaping archaeology. Instead of seeking a single first date, scholars increasingly see a process, a range of movements across thousands of years. Some groups may have vanished, leaving no descendants. Others flourished, their lineages visible in genetics and culture. The history of the Americas is not a single line, but a braided river, with channels that split and rejoin across deep time. Step by step, the people who left the White Sands footprints fit into this flow. They may not have been the first, and they were not the last. Their tracks represent one community within a vast migration that spanned hemispheres, alongside sites in Canada, Brazil, and Chile. They testify to the multiplicity of human presence. Each piece of evidence strengthens the recognition that the peopling of the Americas was more complex, more diverse, and more ancient than once believed. Far away now, the dunes of New Mexico are silent, yet beneath them lies testimony to this wider story. The footprints are not isolated, they are woven into the layered arrivals of humanity, into the spread of families across valleys, coasts, and forests. They remind us that the Americas were not empty waiting for Clovis. They were already human landscapes, walked by many, lived in by communities whose stories we are only beginning to recover. Beneath the sands of New Mexico, the footprints endure as fragile testimony. They are more than impressions in mud. They are voices from a time otherwise silent. Each step pressed into wet ground 23,000 years ago has survived by chance, sealed beneath layers of sediment, revealed only when erosion and science uncovered them. They remind us that human journeys across the Americas began earlier, spread farther, and endured longer than once imagined. The white sands prints speak to continuity as well as mystery. They show that people lived here during the height of the last glacial maximum, long before the retreat of ice sheets. They show families, not only hunters, children playing, adults carrying loads, groups walking together. They show adaptation to a landscape of shifting lakes, encroaching dunes, and roaming megafauna. They show that life persisted, quietly and steadily, even when climates pressed hard against survival. One lesser-known detail concerns the extraordinary precision of preservation. Some prints are so clear that even toe impressions can be seen, along with subtle slips and shifts of weight. Others are faint, visible only when moisture rises at dawn. The range of preservation reveals both the delicacy of the record and the care required to study it. Archaeologists must often work quickly, documenting before the wind erases what time has spared. This balance of fragility and endurance defines the site. Yet mysteries remain, and perhaps always will. We do not know the names or languages of the people who left these tracks. We do not know whether their descendants remained in the region or moved on. We do not know the details of their shelters, their tools, or their beliefs. The footprints show presence but not identity. They are at once vivid and anonymous, intimate yet unknowable. For archaeologists, this paradox is familiar. Evidence clarifies some questions while leaving others forever open. On a planetary scale, the White Sands site is part of a long human story written in movement. From Africa to Eurasia, from Australia to the Americas, footprints mark humanity's spread. Most vanish within moments, washed away or buried. A rare few survive, preserved in ash, mud, or sand. Each of these sites, Litoli in Tanzania, Happisburgh in England, White Sands in New Mexico, captures fleeting instants that illuminate vast spans of time. They remind us that beneath the sweep of climate and migration lie the steps of individuals, ordinary yet enduring. Step by step, the journey into the Americas becomes clearer. It was not a single migration, but many. It was not a brief event, but a process spanning millennia. It involved not only hunters, but families, not only survival, but daily life. The footprints at White Sands show one thread in this tapestry, woven among others in Canada, Chile, and Brazil. Together they form a picture of arrival that is complex, layered, and deeply human. One unresolved question concerns the broader impact of these discoveries on our understanding of American prehistory. If humans were present so early, how did their presence shape ecosystems? Did they interact with megafauna in ways that influenced survival or extinction? Did they adapt rapidly to new climates or carry traditions that slowly transformed? The answers are uncertain, but the questions themselves expand our sense of what it means to study deep history. On a global level, The White Sands discovery underscores the role of chance in what survives. Entire coastal landscapes where early migrants may have lived are now drowned beneath rising seas. Vast stretches of inland camps have eroded or been buried. What we know comes from fragments, preserved in unusual conditions. The gypsum sands of New Mexico are one such place, a rare alignment of geology, climate, and history that allowed footprints to persist. They are fragile gifts, reminders of how much is lost and how much still lies hidden. Today, the dunes shift in silence. Scientists continue to study the prints, scanning them in 3 dimensions, dating their layers, comparing them with other evidence. Visitors walk nearby, often unaware of the history beneath their feet. The lake is gone, the animals extinct, the climate transformed. Yet the footprints remain. They are the most direct connection we have to people who lived during the coldest centuries of the Ice Age. They are fragments of ordinary lives set against planetary change. Step by step, the footprints draw us closer to those who came before. They remind us that the peopling of the Americas was not a simple story of one migration, but a long and complex process. They remind us that climate, ice, and sea-shaped possibilities, yet humans adapted and endured. They remind us that behind every archaeological model lie real people, walking along real shores, leaving impressions that, by chance, we can still see. Far away now, the sands continue to shift. The winds cover and uncover the traces. What remains beneath is delicate, irreplaceable, and profoundly human. The oldest known footprints in the Americas speak quietly across time. They tell us that long before glaciers withdrew, long before Clovis hunters ranged the plains, families were already here. They walked, carried, and played along the shores of a lake that no longer exists. Their steps endure, fragile but unbroken, carrying across 23,000 years the memory of lives lived in the heart of the Ice Age. The sands of New Mexico hold more than silence. Beneath their shifting surface lie the oldest human footprints known in the Americas. Pressed into wet mud 23,000 years ago, they remain fragile, delicate yet enduring. They remind us that long before glaciers melted, long before familiar cultures rose, people were already here. Step by step, families walked along a vanished lake. Children ran ahead, leaving playful arcs in the mud. Adults carried burdens, their weight pressing deeper into the earth. Together, their movements recorded not extraordinary moments, but ordinary life, walking, pausing, playing, surviving. These impressions are intimate, more personal than tools or bones. They show not what people made, but how they moved. The footprints carry mysteries still. We do not know the names of those who left them, or the languages they spoke. We do not know whether their descendants remained in the basin or moved elsewhere. We do not know the full paths that brought them from distant Siberia to this desert lake. The prints preserve presence, but not identity. They ask questions more than they answer.
On a planetary scale, they remind us of the fragility of evidence. Most traces vanish, washed by water, erased by wind, buried by time. These survived only through rare chance, sealed in sediment until erosion revealed them again. They are gifts from the deep past, glimpses of lives otherwise lost.
Now, the lake is gone, the animals are gone, the Ice Age has passed, but the footprints remain, whispering across millennia. They remind us that humanity's story is deeper older, and more intricate than once believed. And they remind us that even the simplest traces, a line of steps across soft ground, can endure longer than memory itself.